Welcome to 100 Huntley Street. Well, it is the last few days of June, and we are looking forward to celebrating Canada Day later this week. I'm sure you are too. You know, today we want to bring you a show that focuses on what is happening right here in Canada. As people of faith in this nation, we know it's important for you to stay informed, and we are committed to doing just that. So earlier this month, two important things happened in the Canadian Parliament. First, Bill C-9, the Combating Hate Act, passed, despite thousands of you contacting their MP and communicating their concerns. In this bill, it was the good faith religious belief defense that has been removed, meaning if a person is charged and found guilty of willfully promoting hatred, there will no longer be a defense for a good faith religious belief. The Evangelical Fellowship of Canada explains this safeguard as ensuring the hate speech provisions, which were intended to protect identifiable groups, weren't used to silence or suppress the good faith expression of religious beliefs that others may find objectionable or even offensive. And you know, those definitions could shift over the years as culture changes. So obviously, it's a big concern to all of us. This was not the outcome so many of us had hoped and prayed for Bill C-9, but the Justice Minister did say that Canadians will always be able to pray, preach, teach, interpret Scripture, and express religious belief in good faith without fear of criminal sanction. So, what do? We continue to pray. Not just for the protection of religious freedoms, but we pray for our brothers and sisters, for our neighbors, for this land. Prayer does make a difference. We believe that here at 100 Huntley Street, and don't stop just because of one setback. One of the ways you can join other believers in prayer is actually by attending the National Day of Prayer in Ottawa, July 9th to 11th, led by the organization For My Canada. Now, if you're in the area, we encourage you to consider attending. And even if you aren't, you can live stream the event or even just pray in unity with your fellow Canadians. On the same day that Bill C-9 passed, a joint parliamentary committee on medical assistance in dying for people with mental illness tabled their latest report. And it is encouraging. Yay! For more on that, let's head over to Laura Watson with her guest, Dina Warren.
Thanks so much, Cheryl. Well, over the past 10 years, more than 100,000 Canadians have died through medical assistance in dying, making it one of the most significant and often emotional public policy conversations in our country. 2 years ago, many Canadians, including many of you, expressed concern to their MPs as the federal government considered expanding MAiD to include people whose sole underlying condition was mental illness. After years of debate, study, and 2 government delays, a parliamentary committee has now released a report recommending that mental illness remain indefinitely excluded as a sole condition for accessing assisted death. This is a very positive step in the protection of life for the most vulnerable in Canada, and we want to say thank you to you for your advocacy around this issue. So what does this recommendation mean? Why was it made, and what could happen next? Joining me now to help us understand this important development is Dina Warren, Director of Legal Affairs at the Canadian Centre for Christian Charities. Dina, thank you for being with us again here on 100 Huntley Street.
Laura, thank you for inviting me. Always a pleasure.
Well, Dina, tell us about this report. So what stood out to you most about it?
Well, what stood out to me is the singular recommendation. Often in parliamentary committee reports, you see recommendations, sometimes even at odds with one another, but this singular recommendation was unique, in my opinion.
And for viewers who may not follow this closely, the issue of MAiD and how it's been developing in Canada, why is this recommendation so significant?
It is very significant. What we have seen is a constant expansion of MAiD, really without kind of any stop or barrier or pause for thought, except for these temporary delays. But this really shows that there is a willingness to really look at the issue, give pause, and in this case, not automatically expand criteria.
Yeah. And so what do you think is next? What do you think is coming?
Well, what will happen next is now that the report has been tabled, the government will review the report and then they will respond. So they will provide a written response to the report indicating what they are thinking, what they may do, what legislation they may introduce in response to the recommendation.
And the Justice Minister, he'll review the report over the summer?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah. Now, some of the opinions connected to this report, some of the people who were on the committee didn't have full agreement on what the conclusion the report came to. How impactful do you think those dissenting voices could be for whether the government takes the recommendation or not?
Yes, absolutely. So in the report, there is a recommendation, but there were supplementary opinions and there were dissenting reports as well. And so the government will look at, the Minister of Justice will presumably look at the entirety of the report, the evidence that was presented, and weigh that out in terms of how the government then will respond. Now, it is important to note that this is a committee of both the House of Commons, so MPs and senators, and all parties are represented on the committee as well.
Something that was very interesting and it caught my attention was that one of the committee co-chairs made a point of saying that this development actually brings into question the entire expansion of MAiD in Canada in multiple ways, what we've seen happen once it was legalized. Tell us a bit about that conversation and how it's being opened up.
Sure, absolutely. Well, a lot of the evidence actually spoke to problematic implementation and within the MAiD provision process right now in the system. And certainly if we look back to Carter, which was the Supreme Court decision that decriminalized assisted suicide, it called for a rigorous framework that is scrupulously monitored. And a lot of the witness testimony before the committee actually brought that into question, whether it's being monitored, whether there is actual oversight, how families can engage and interact and be aware whether the criteria is being too broadly, flexibly applied, doctor shopping across borders. There are a lot of problems that were identified through the course of the testimony that bring into question whether those frameworks and that foundation, as said in Carter, actually exist.
I think it's something that is important to note that Canada has some of the most progressive MAiD laws in the world. And over the last 10 years, since MAiD was made legal in Canada, Dina, what have you seen in terms of the progression? I mean, I said off the top of our conversation, 100,000 Canadian lives lost to MAiD. Tell us about the progression, how you've seen it unfold.
Yes, absolutely. And that number is saddening, for sure, because so many people have not had other treatment, other care, and other support. So what we have seen is initially it was limited or supposed to be limited to when your death is reasonably foreseeable. Mm-hmm. But very quickly after that, it was expanded to when your death is not reasonably foreseeable. And it has created a lot of uncertainty and vulnerability, particularly for those within, for example, the disability community, who feel that they actually don't even have access to support for their life and they're being offered death instead. And it's deeply troubling.
It certainly is. And it's not to diminish the suffering of those who are experiencing mental health issues or mental illness. I think one of the things we understand is that more supports need to be available to people who are struggling with mental illness.
Absolutely. Again, some of the testimony before the committee indicated that a third of Canadians with mental illness have not had any access to care, where sometimes the time to receive care for for mental illness is actually longer than it could take under the current MAiD regime, should that have been offered. So there are definitely some underlying matters that need to be addressed for sure.
Well, Dina, over the years, we've shared stories of people who have experienced, MAiD being offered to them, maybe MAiD as an option, and some of those stories have been very compelling to share with our viewers because so many experience this season where they're hopeless and they turn to experiencing hope and their lives change. One of those people is Leah Malusis. She's a young woman living with mental illness, and she told us that she felt personally impacted by the possibility of MAiD expanding to include mental illness, and we just want to take a look at that with you right now.
Over time, I realized that there was a lot less joy and happiness in my life, a lot more gray, I guess, just kind of this lack of color. I didn't look forward to my days. That was kind of what I saw the future as, was going to be this, intangible pain that never really went away, that I was kind of subjected to at various points, and that it was out of my control. And so there were various things that I did to try to give myself that control, because who likes to feel, like life is painful, suffering is happening to them. And so I engaged in self-harm and eating disorders, things that made me feel like I could manage what was happening. I had already started thinking about how nice it would be to not have to kind of carry this weight, carry this suffering, wake up every day and be upset that I was awake again. And so it felt, when people then were pushing for euthanasia and assisted suicide, even before expanding it to mental illness, it felt like a targeted attack. And I felt like the belief underlying this advance in society was one that threatened my existence, because ultimately euthanasia and assisted suicide puts forward this idea that if you are experiencing suffering, that maybe life isn't worth living anymore. The message we should be putting forward is one of hope, not of yeah, maybe depression is right. Maybe there isn't actually hope for you. Our job is to come around that person, be their advocate, and say, life really does get better.
Oh, Leah's words there, life really does get better. It can get better. Dina, Leah is such a shining example of how things can change, and you know her quite well.
I do. I love this story. I was actually just talking to Leah last night, and she's so right. We need to be able to offer that hope. And in her circumstance, I know she is a brilliant lawyer, an advocate for life, and she is doing so much to contribute to our social fabric, and she is thriving. And that's the reality of what happens when we remove MAiD for mental illness, when we offer hope and support and treatment instead. We can see people thrive and really dig into those gifts that God has given them and the gifts that they can bring to society and our communities.
Yes, well, you know, Dina, that really hits home for me. I've shared this before in the program, but just as I was coming to faith in Jesus at 17, I was struggling with wanting to end my life. I was having those feelings. I was deeply depressed. And, you know, I encountered Jesus, and suddenly I felt this unconditional love and this joy and this hope. And so that has really impacted me wanting to say, let's talk about this issue. Because you look at people like Leah, and I'm looking at the next generation. I know you are as well. We're moms, and we're thinking, how do we protect them and show them that hope is possible? I think something that a lot of Canadians need to hear right now, you know, is if they are in a dark valley with mental health or mental illness and they're struggling, that there are people around them who love them and care for them. How would you encourage someone who is in that kind of a season right now?
Absolutely. Well, first I'd encourage your viewers, our Christian communities, our churches, to really reach out, to have these conversations, to make it something that we can talk about freely and openly, and maybe even just this committee report. You know, this is an opportunity to say, we want to talk to you about this. We want to show you that support and love that, you know, we have a great opportunity to talk about now. And even in the report, I will say they talked about the need to be able to do that apart from MAiD and not send conflicting messages to those who might be in those dark valleys, to say, no, there is hope, and we want to provide that to you. So I do think it's a great opportunity for you to say, as the gospel reached you, to use that to reach others as well in that place.
Yeah, and that is really a clarion call to the church, right, in Canada, for us to share the hope of Jesus, to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And I can't help but think about, what are some of the things our local churches could be doing, do you think, to help support and meet the mental health needs of communities in our nation? What do you think?
Well, certainly, absolutely, just being there first. I mean, when we look at the MAiD statistics, even apart from those who would have been receiving it for mental illness, loneliness is often cited as a reason. Feeling like they're a burden on their families and caregivers is also a reason. And so I think that we can really, as a church community, step in and just be present, alleviate loneliness, you know, visit, just sit with. So that is something that's so simple and so important. And we see from stats that is already a factor that we can address quite easily just by presence. We can connect people with supports as well that they may not be aware of, and just help them to know that they're not alone in this. And I think even having these conversations here with you, Laura, is such a key piece in that.
Yeah, it certainly is. And, you know, I just want to say right now to whoever's watching, if you want to call our prayer partners, they can support you too. Call 1-866-273-4444. They can also connect you to mental health resources that might encourage you on your journey, and to know that healing and hope is possible. You know, Dina, the next step here is we're waiting to hear if this if the committee recommendation is being accepted by the federal government. So our viewers right now who care deeply about this topic, what could they be doing over the next few weeks and months?
Sure. Well, continue praying, for sure. We've seen an answer to prayer in the committee recommendation, which is amazing. So thankful for that and for the diligent and faithful prayers of your viewers. So please do keep praying. And then I think it's another opportunity to reach out to a local MP and just say thank you. And just, this is a positive thing. Often when we're reaching out to MPs, we're asking, please don't do this. Please don't move forward. But here we can say this is a great recommendation from a joint committee representing all the parties. And we just really encourage you to move forward and support that recommendation. So we can interact with our government leaders in a really positive way, which is a great opportunity.
It really is. It's a great opportunity to encourage them because their jobs are also not easy. And Dina, you're going to be posting on your blog, the 4Cs blog. Tell us a bit more about how our viewers can connect to you there.
Sure. Our viewers can connect anytime on our website, which is 4csccc.org. And the blog link is directly at the top of the page. And that's where we post all of our latest updates on policy, legal, legislative changes to help keep everyone up to date. And we also give some information on how they can engage should they wish to do that.
Well, Dina, thank you so much for your advocacy, for your deep care for Canadians, for how you lead with compassion and truth and love. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Laura.
Stay with us. So much more to come.
These are our heroes of hope, prayer line volunteers. We honor their compassionate service. Every day, 1,300 people reach out for prayer.
We're just delighted, grateful that you are here today with us in person. And we want to celebrate you and honor you as our precious volunteer prayer partners.
Our heroes of hope answer with kindness, bringing God's love and comfort.
Everyone deserves someone to go to God in prayer with. Thank you for being that person. To the thousands that call every single day.
Together, they've devoted over 1 million hours to prayer ministry, changing lives and even generations.
Your prayers are like incense, every one of them.
You know, it's all about reaching out to others.
This Canada Day, celebrate with 100 Huntley Street. Enjoy uplifting music from royal anthems and inspiring conversations with special guests as we reflect on faith, hope, and our nation. Join us for this special Canada Day celebration.
Hello, I'm Kevin Shepherd, CEO of Crossroads NES TV. I have some exciting news about what God is doing here, and I want to invite you to join our special community by becoming a monthly member. And here's why you should. Inspiration. Our content uplifts and inspires. And as a monthly partner, you help share the hope of Jesus with so many. Impact. Crossroads is more than media. We provide 1,300 prayer interactions daily, offering comfort and biblical resources, and your membership makes an eternal impact. Global missions. We respond to disasters and partner with NGOs for relief and rebuilding. By joining, you care for those in need. As a Crossroads member, you join like-minded community. You get exclusive content, friendly support. You can attend member events and stay informed. Becoming a member is simple. Choose your monthly level and payment method, and we hope you would join us, make a life-changing difference in people's lives today. Thank you for your commitment to our shared vision.
Well, I don't know about you, but I am so encouraged by the latest report on medical assistance in dying. It was about 3 years ago when we started sharing information about this expansion to Canada's euthanasia laws. And so many of you, our viewers, reached out to your local MPs and you prayed as well that this expansion would be stopped. And I believe those conversations, those prayers, shifted the momentum. The national dialogue changed from making assisted dying more permissible in our country to having politicians and the media really examine what's at stake. It's people's lives. We were honored to have a role in rallying the troops, and that's just one of the many reasons that I believe 100 Huntley Street is integral to this nation and to Canada's spiritual destiny. I often think, what would Canada look like without 100 Huntley Street? And it's a nation with a very limited faith voice and limited influence. And honestly, we need this voice. You know, we're privileged to come to you every day here and encourage all of us to look to God for life's challenges and to advocate for this nation to remain free and safe for everybody. You know, a viewer named Linda messaged us about the impact following the full program that we did on the expansion to medical assistance in dying. And she wrote, I have a 27-year-old daughter who is currently institutionalized for mental health concerns. It concerns me that MAiD might be introduced to her as a solution. Brings tears to my eyes that you are standing up for the mentally ill. Just wanted to let you know I appreciate you sounding the alarm. That's the difference that you make. And you know, we will always stand up for faith and values in this nation, and we want to invite you to join us on this mission. You know, I often think of the quote that's been attributed to Edward Burke, and it hits home so often as we face challenges in our world. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men or women to do nothing. That's why I'm asking you today, I'm asking you to join us, to support this mission, to invest in the spiritual fabric of Canada. It matters. You matter. Your support matters. Will you call us right now with your best gift? We need everybody to come on board so we can continue this work of letting you know what's happening in Canada, mobilizing the troops in prayer, calling your MPs, and let's make sure this is the best nation to live in the world. That number is 1-800-265-3100. You can also give online at crossroads.ca. But whatever you can do absolutely makes a difference. And listen, you need to know, we love you. We appreciate you, and we're so thankful for you. We don't see this as something we do that you support. We see this as something that we do together. We are a team, and we are changing the face of Canada with God's help, and we continue to pray for that. Thank you. Well, I don't know about you, but I love learning about new perspectives on the ancient stories of the Bible. Today, lead pastor at Beulah Alliance Church in Edmonton, Daniel Im, is diving into the story of Moses.
Are you familiar with the end of Moses' life? By the time we get to Deuteronomy 34 in the Bible, it's been decades since Moses encountered God through a burning bush and learned to discern his voice. Decades since God used him to split the Red Sea and lead the Israelites out of Egyptian slavery. Decades since the Ten Commandments, decades since God told Moses that he wouldn't lead the Israelites across the finish line and into the promised land because of his and the Israelites' disobedience to God. And it's been decades of wandering through the wilderness. So at the end of Moses' life, we see in Deuteronomy 34 that God brings him to the top of Pisgah, to a place where he can overlook the promised land. Right? Finally, they've made it. Man, what a sight it must have been. But instead of telling him, well done, Moses, good and faithful servant, you can now enter into the promised land, God says something else in Deuteronomy 34:4. This is the land I promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will give it to your descendants. I've let you see it with your own eyes, but you will not cross into it. And then in the next verse, it says that Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab according to the Lord's word. So that's it. That's the end of Moses' life. And for most of us, we think that's where it ends. We think this is just a history lesson, but over the next couple of days, I want to show you the insights that are scattered through this passage. And here's the first one in Deuteronomy 34:7. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not weak, and his vitality had not left him. Even though Moses was 120 years old when he died, it says here that his eyes were not weak, and his vitality had not left him. In other words, he had enough strength and energy, vigor and vitality to keep going. But he didn't. And it's not because he couldn't. He didn't because he knew that leading the people of God into the promised land was not about him and it wasn't for him. He knew that his job, his role, and his calling wasn't about his legacy, what people will remember him for, and what he did or didn't do. Moses came to terms with the fact that even though his life was coming to an end, God wasn't abandoning him. And God wasn't abandoning Israel. God wasn't turning his back on Moses and saying, Moses, you're too old and you don't matter anymore, so forget you. No. Instead, Moses was beginning to realize that our lives are not actually about our own legacies and our own little kingdoms. Moses was learning that what he had devoted his life to was much, much bigger than him, and that it would continue to move forward and progress even without him. So yes, sure, he wasn't going to enjoy all that he had devoted his life to, but the generations after him were. And yeah, sure, he wasn't going to taste the fruit of the trees that he had planted, but he knew that the generations after him were. And he was learning how to be at peace with that.
Oh, this is such a word of wisdom. And you know, it's funny because Indigenous people think generationally.
Yeah.
They don't always think about like what's happening in my generation. Maybe sometimes in our culture we can become a little more selfish.
Yep.
But they think about what is the next generation, the next generation. And I think that generational thinking is biblical in a way. And we see that in the story of Moses.
Yes.
And it really encouraged me too, because I don't know about you, but sometimes, you know, you're just like, you want your life to matter.
Yep.
You want to make an impact on your kids, in your job, like in your marriage.
Yes.
Like you want to make an impact on others, and nothing's perfect.
No.
Right? But that good reminder that it's not about us, but it's about what is God doing that's so much bigger than us. And we're just a cog.
Yeah.
In a bigger plan.
Yeah, we really are. I love that, Cheryl. And when you're talking about Indigenous people, I think it's 7 generations, right? They plan for 7 generations. And I think that's a beautiful understanding and perspective. You know, I always think about how Moses didn't actually reach the promised land. Like at the end of the day, the Lord let him glimpse it. But I remember reading that for the first time and thinking, he didn't get to step across the threshold? Like, is that really what happened? But, you know, that's what that story reminds us of. It isn't about us. It's about Jesus. And, you know, the prayer of my heart often is that when people look at me, I hope they see Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, I hope they don't even need to remember me, but that they would remember the hope they experienced in a moment where, you know, we got to share about who Jesus is.
And he's part of that great cloud of witnesses. The Bible talks about this, people who are like cheering us on in the race.
Yeah.
And I often think, you know, I lost a good friend in January, and I remember thinking, she's having the best day of her life, and I'm having the worst. Yeah. And, you know, when Moses went on, I'm sure everybody was missing him. Joshua was missing him. They're having the worst day as they're mourning him, but he's having the best day because when he gets to heaven, he sees the legacy. He sees the impact. He sees the big picture of what God was doing. And you're at peace in that moment, right? You're not mourning the fact, like, I didn't get to see the promised land. He's going to see from heaven, looking over that whole group of Israelites crossing over into the promised land and rejoicing. Imagine what the rejoicing was there in heaven.
That's a great perspective. That's the eternal perspective, right? You step back and you understand it's not just this lifetime, it is the one to come. And that's actually the one, you know, that matters, that we should be focused on. You know, I think about Moses and I think about the parting of the Red Sea. And that is a miracle I wish I had seen. How could, you know, I always think about it, Cheryl. I actually do.
Drama.
But here's the thing. You know what's amazing? Like, God does part and make a way even when it doesn't look like there's a way. And we've been seeing that. You know, even that MAiD update that we had today and the recommendation of the committee saying that we're not going to allow this to be access to those whose sole underlying condition is mental illness. That is a miracle. That's God parting the sea. 2 years ago, a lot of our advocacy groups we were working with here at 100 Huntley Street didn't even think that could happen. I can remember them saying, you know what, it's just going to have to be prayer. We really don't think it will go this way.
It's absolutely incredible. And you think about that's God's heart for the vulnerable.
Yeah.
We want to encourage you too, like, it's not a done deal, right? So so it's time to keep praying. Keep praying that C9 isn't going to be used against somebody who's in good faith following the tenets of the Bible.
Yes.
We need to pray that the protection of the vulnerable in our culture continues, because the vulnerable are always the first to suffer and the least protected. But it's our job, right? This morning my devotional was about the verse that talks about to have justice and righteousness flow like a river. Right? That idea that as people of faith, it's our job to ensure protection. It's our job to make sure that the vulnerable are served and protected and honored and given dignity. Right? And so many Christians, so many of you do that so well. I mean, I see it all the time in my work with Crossroads Cares. Even here in Canada, we partner with food banks and, you know, shelters for those experiencing homelessness. And Christians are on the front lines of loving people in just an extraordinary way.
And we just want to say thank you to you for being on the front lines with us, the front lines at your local church or here, your support with us here at Crossroads. But thank you for shining Jesus in your community and in your day-to-day. And if you need support today, call our prayer lines. We're always there for you 24/7. We love you and God loves you. We'll see you soon. God bless. Bye.
Thank you for your ongoing support of Crossroads. a supporter-funded nonprofit organization and member of the Canadian Centre for Christian Charities. Thanks to faithful people like you, we are able to continue producing 100 Huntley Street. You can write to Crossroads, P.O. Box 5100, Burlington, Ontario, L7R4M2, or visit crossroads.ca to learn more about our programs.